Wow. Okay, I have just seen Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 and it is fantastic. I'm not going to pretend like it's perfect, and there are a few issues I'm going to discuss in this video, but Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 is the best Marvel movie we've had for what feels like an eternity. I've spoken a fair bit about how the MCU has lost its way since Endgame. That's not to say that everything they've made has been awful, but it is undeniable that Marvel no longer has the same stranglehold on audiences as it did before Endgame. Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania was quite frankly a disaster. This should have been the grand opening of Phase 5, showcasing to audiences the wider Kang storyline that was going to lead us up to the next Avengers. Unfortunately, it was just a generic cookie-cutter Marvel film that tried to give the illusion of high stakes, but it never truly felt like our heroes were ever in any danger. It was the last thing Marvel needed after Phase 4. You can argue about whether Phase 4 is actually any weaker than any of the other phases, but what can't be argued is that Phase 4 is certainly the least well received of all the phases so far. Black Widow was a mess, feeling more like a spit on the grave than the swan song that Natasha Romanoff deserved. Shang-Chi was a perfectly fine film. It had great action and a very likeable lead and a magnificent villain, but personally I think it's quite a forgettable film too. I've seen lots of people say it's in their top 10 Marvel films, and that's totally up to you. I do think it's a good film, but for me personally it's more of a mid-tier one than being one of the greats. Eternals was a critical flop and a film that tried to juggle too much and ended up dropping the ball on everything. I don't think it's as bad as some people make out, but it isn't a great movie. And because there were lots of characters in that film, I think some of them, like Gilgamesh, Ajak and Icarus, ended up being wasted. Spider-Man No Way Home was the true highlight of Phase 4, managing to live up to the unbelievable hype that was put on its shoulders by having genuine heart and repercussions for its main character. Whilst I actually liked Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, it did have a lot of problems, including a wonky script which has become an unfortunate presence in many Marvel projects, and Thor Love and Thunder was an unfunny parody of a character that Marvel had just gotten right. I've not seen Black Panther: Wakanda Forever, but I've heard very good things, so I am looking forward to eventually watching that. I haven't even discussed the Disney Plus shows or the consistently inconsistent CGI, which is an issue that I overall believe was not a problem in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. It's clear to everyone that Marvel have not been receiving the red carpet treatment like they used to, and it's no surprise that a lot of people said that if Guardians 3 sucks, then that's it, they're done with Marvel. So I'm very happy to tell you that Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 is awesome and a great capper to what might be the most consistent sub-franchise in the MCU. It's crazy to think that it's been nearly 10 years since the first Guardians of the Galaxy film, back during a time when most people didn't even know who Chris Pratt was, and the concept of a talking raccoon being one of the greatest characters in superhero film history seemed implausible. It's weird because I actually don't think Guardians of the Galaxy has aged that well. At the time I adored the film, it was fresh, unique and fun. However, having quirky characters in a humorous space film where the action sequences have loud, energetic music from the 80s playing over the top is no longer as unique as it once was. It feels like a lot of films over the past decade, inside and outside the MCU, have tried to replicate the formula of the Guardians of the Galaxy films, and all it's done is dilute my interest in that formula. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 received a more mixed but still positive reception when it released. In fact, I've always preferred it to the first. When Peter and Yondu fly up into space as Ego collapses in on himself, I cried in the cinema. I love Yondu, so glad that that film let him shine. Then there's the Christmas special, which was great for all it was, and then we come to Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, which has the worst critical reception of the trilogy, and yet I think this might be my favourite of the three Guardians of the Galaxy films. Every aspect of the film that involves Rocket Raccoon is perfect. I have no qualms with admitting at multiple points throughout the film that I was on the brink of opening the floodgates. The film does a fantastic job of depicting the horrors of Rocket's creation, and holds no punches in showcasing the physical and emotional scars that it has left him with. Both Bradley Cooper and Sean Gunn deserve a lot of praise for their performance as Rocket. Bradley Cooper has always given Rocket the perfect voice, but he has to go to another level here and he does not fail to deliver. If he couldn't capture Rocket's pain, then huge emotional moments would not resonate with me as much as they should have. Fortunately, Bradley Cooper delivered his A-game for Rocket, and so did Sean Gunn. Sean Gunn has always been the mocap for Rocket on set, but now he got to actually voice him too. Sean Gunn provides the voice for Rocket during some of the flashbacks when he's really young and cute. These flashback sequences were perfect justification for why Rocket is the way that he is, and just thinking about them now is making me emotional. I heard that there were talks about there being a Rocket Raccoon origin film before this, and I can totally see how that would have worked, especially as I believe that it would have been an origin for both Rocket and Groot. Some people might have wished for us to have an exclusively Rocket story without the Guardians, but I'm glad that we got to see the story this way. It was good that the Guardians themselves got to see firsthand what happened to Rocket, and I'm glad that they all took down the High Evolutionary together as a team. Also, I have no idea how this ended up being the PG-13 film because there's some really graphic stuff in here. In the UK, The Batman somehow got a 15 rating, but Guardians 3 got by over 12. There was legitimate body horror in this film. There's one moment during the Guardians face-off with the High Evolutionary where I legitimately went, how did they get away with that? I mean, I shouldn't be too surprised the film does include the first utterance of the F-word in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, although when I found out about it, I was kind of hoping that it would be used in an actually emotionally affecting moment, and not just for a joke, but it's not really an issue. Whilst this film will receive universal praise for how it treats Rocket Raccoon's story, how do the other characters fare? Well, I think the film offers up one of the better MCU villains that we've seen. Marvel have never really had the best villains outside of a couple iconic ones like Loki and Thanos, but I think the High Evolutionary was a great villain. Chukwudi Iwuji was a great choice by James Gunn, and I'm so glad that the two of them were able to find each other on the set of Peacemaker. It's honestly so refreshing to have an irredeemably evil villain. A character who does everything with no remorse. He has this amazing god complex and just looks down upon everyone. He strives for perfection, and I love how this is reflected in how imperfect he is. He's just a bad guy. You're not going to be seeing people writing on bathroom stalls saying the High Evolutionary was right. I think he's a well-written, well-acted bad guy, and I think the film does everything that it can with him. But what about our heroes? Well, the film does a lot of interesting things with Gamora by making her completely unlikable. After Infinity War and Endgame, I like that the film doesn't act like Gamora's back to normal. This is an alternate Gamora, and she kind of sucks as a person. But I like that she does develop over the film, and I like that it didn't even bother with a will they won't they for her and Star-Lord. Star-Lord's Gamora is gone forever, but at least this film and Gamora allow him to come to terms with his grief. One of the issues that I had with Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, despite my love for it, is that Star-Lord felt like a bit of an afterthought despite being integral to that film's story. Whilst Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 is Rocket's story and he is the heart of the film, Star-Lord still feels like its lead. He is the character making the decisions, and the Guardians, while occasionally making jokes at his expense, do follow his lead. Chris Pratt gives potentially his best performance as the character, as Star-Lord doesn't start the film in the best emotional state, but it was a joy watching him slowly unpack his feelings over the course of the film and address them head on. Nebula has arguably the best character development in the entire MCU. She's almost a completely different character to who she was in the first Guardians of the Galaxy. Even just comparing her here to who she was in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, she is completely different. Karen Gillan has done a magnificent job over the years showing how Nebula has changed, and it does feel like Nebula has reached her end point here in terms of character journey. I don't know if I was picking up on something that wasn't there, but I was kind of hoping that Star-Lord and Nebula would get together. Nebula really sticks her neck out for Peter throughout this film, and to me it felt more than just looking out for her friend, but I don't know. I'm not sure how people would feel if Star-Lord just went from one sister to another, especially as in some ways it does feel like the personalities of Gamora and Nebula have been swapped with one another. Mantis, Drax and Groot didn't really get much to do. It wasn't that big of a deal for Mantis and Drax since they were the leads in the Christmas special, and Drax continues to be the comedic highlight of the series. But it should be pointed out that the film heavily focuses on Rocket and then Star-Lord, Gamora and Nebula. But I do think that the film progresses Mantis' character and has her come to terms with who she is. Groot, I'll be honest, Groot's just kind of there most of the time. He isn't really a standout like he was in volumes 1 and 2, but I still like him, and I do like that Kraglin has slowly become more and more important. And I'm glad that more and more people are appreciating Sean Gunn's work. One character that it seems people weren't super fond of in this film was Adam Warlock, but I'm going to go against the grain here and say that I think he was totally fine. I don't think the film uses him to his fullest, but I think as a starting point for the character in this franchise, I think it's a good start. I hope that this character does actually evolve though, and doesn't remain in this infant-like state, because then I'll join in with the complaints. Speaking of complaints, there are too many songs in this film, and some of them don't feel like they fit in my opinion. Music is a key cornerstone of the Guardians of the Galaxy films, and I love both soundtracks to both Guardians of the Galaxy and Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, but honestly, the songs in this one just aren't sticking out to me like before. There are a few like Creep that stick out in my memory, but there's no Come and Get Your Love or Mr. Blue Sky for me personally in this film, but maybe that's just due to my own taste in music. One criticism of Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 that I don't agree with is the tonal issues. Personally, I think James Gunn did a good job balancing the tone in this film. A lot of the jokes didn't land in this film, but I do think that there wasn't any jarring moments in terms of tone for me. Speaking of funny moments that didn't land, one thing that I didn't like was how sometimes the characters would just start shouting at each other. It got a bit grating at times, specifically with Nebula and Mantis. But it's not a film ruiner or anything. Obviously, I consider this to be one of the best MCU films ever made. Also, I don't really care about Cosmo the dog. They do serve a purpose at the end of the film, but honestly, I never clicked with the character. But maybe they'll be better going forward, like I hope Adam Warlock will be. There's a final negative that I want to bring up that is a bit spoilery and involves the ending of the film, so here's your brief window of opportunity to run before I say it. Okay, here goes. I wasn't a massive fan of the Guardians splitting up at the end of the film. Somehow, none of them died, which was the biggest shock for me, so I was wondering how the group were going to go their separate ways. Gamora leaving the party made sense, but the others, at least for me, it felt like they all went their separate ways because they had to, because this is the end, instead of it feeling completely natural. No one else seems to have this problem, but that's just how I feel after my initial watch. Perhaps this opinion will change, but it did feel like Star-Lord and Mantis left because someone has to leave. Rocket and Groot sticking together made sense, and so did Nebula and Drax. But to me, it felt like more the group going on hiatus instead of calling it quits. But that's just me. Again, not a major issue, and I've spoken to one of my friends about this and he loved it. So perhaps I'm making an issue out of nothing, or perhaps I just don't want the band to break up. But that is how I felt watching the scene where they decide to split up. One positive that goes hand in hand with the CGI for this film being surprisingly great is the action. I think Guardians of the Galaxy has always had great action, and James Gunn really takes it to another level in this film. There's been a lot of talk about a certain hallway fight that is done in a one-shot that is really excellent, but all the action in this film is wonderful. There is a world where James Gunn remained fired and didn't deliver this film to us. That is a world that I'm glad that I don't live in, because there are some truly excellent shots in this film, like when Adam Warlock is zipping around and the camera flies alongside him, or just that shot of a hand reaching out to grab Rocket. James Gunn is a fantastic director and a brilliant writer too, humour being subjective and all. I'm glad that before he takes the reins over at DC, he made one final love letter to Marvel. This is the shot in the arm that both Marvel and Marvel fans needed. This was the last straw for a lot of people, myself included. I can't remember for certain, but I'm pretty sure I said in one of my previous videos that this film didn't deliver, then I would stop watching Marvel because I've been hurt too many times. But I'm so glad that this film delivered in every aspect that mattered. I was extremely excited for this film. Guardians of the Galaxy, whilst the film that I think has aged, was one of my favourite films when it came out, and Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 built on that for me. The Guardians were one of the best parts of Avengers Infinity War, and both Nebula and Rocket were major characters in Endgame that made that film a whole lot more enjoyable. Thor Love and Thunder had its issues, but the Guardians of the Galaxy were not one of them, and the Christmas special was a great way to end last year. I've been a huge fan of the Guardians, and I'm so grateful that James Gunn decided to bow out on a high note. There's a part of me that genuinely doesn't want to see these characters again, and there's another part of me that hopes we get some sort of reunion tour in 10 years or something. But either way, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 is magnificent. On an emotional level, it is the best film that the MCU have ever put out, and the rest of the film is great too. I really hope that both Secret Invasion and the Marvels capitalise on this newfound momentum, and I wouldn't be surprised if Marvel paid very close attention to this film, just like they did with the original. But hey, that's just how I feel about this film. What about you? Let me know in the comments below, how does this film stack up for you? Did you like it or not, and why? Plus, do you agree with what I said, or are there some things that I mentioned that bother you? Sound off in the comments below and I'll be sure to reply. Anyway, have a good one.